this podcast about your guys' journey in music and how you got to where you are today.
Sure.
Cool. I did read, JJ, you're from San Jose.
I am, yeah.
Okay, tell me about that. Were you born and raised there?
I technically was born in Southern California, but my parents moved to San Jose when I was like 1.5. So I grew up there, and yeah, like spent my entire childhood. My parents were kind of more into sports than music. So music was like a little part of my life, but not a huge factor. It's so crazy to me that this is where I ended up.
That's amazing, though. So you weren't like really into music when you were growing up, or?
Well, I started taking piano lessons when I was 5, and I really liked that. And I was in a couple of like choirs and stuff in school. But once I got to high school, I kind of had to choose between if I was going to be really serious about music or sports, because they, the older you get, the more time consuming those
things. Yeah, if you do one sport, you're pretty much doing that sport only.
Yeah.
or two or whatever.
Well, and when I got to high school, I did audition for the vocal ensemble, and I got in all 4 years, but I never got very many solos. And so I just figured, okay, well, I like singing, it's fun, but I excel in sports. So I guess that's kind of my thing. And so that was my focus for most of my growing up.
All right. Well, you showed them, huh? With not giving you those solos.
Yeah. I called up all of my old teachers and I,
rub their faces in the dirt.
Send them all your albums.
How's this for a solo?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Well, Dave, where were you born and raised?
We were actually born about 40 miles from each other. Like we were both born in Orange County.
Okay.
And then both of our parents moved away within about a year. So mine went to Arizona.
Okay, you were saying Phoenix earlier. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. And so I never considered music as a possible career. Like my uncle was a photojournalist for the big newspaper in Baltimore.
Wow.
And I always wanted to be a photographer like him. And so one of the premier schools for photojournalism was San Jose State University. And so when it was time to go to college, I applied to one school, I got in, and I went to San Jose State. And JJ and I ended up meeting like our sophomore year of college. And it was right about the time that she had started to write songs. And one of my roommates had really wanted to be in a band, and JJ had shared some music with us, and he was the one who was like really motivated to start like finding open mic nights and that kind of thing. And so we just did this thing because my roommate wanted to be
in a band.
Yeah. He was like, okay, I'll be the drummer and the manager, and I'll find places for us to play. And Dave and I were like, okay, sure.
And did you guys have songs together, or were you writing separately, JJ? How did that work?
It was mostly just my original songs that we were doing at that point. But we eventually, like, we started playing music together in college, and then our senior year we got engaged, and we started talking about, okay, well, what do we want to do once we graduate? And we had this really interesting dilemma because Dave was offered, he got a really great internship the summer before senior year of college. He went and interned as a photographer for the big newspaper in Phoenix.
Wow.
And at the end of his time there, they basically offered him a job. And we were like trying to figure out, okay, after we get married, do we take this secure 9-to-5 photography job in Phoenix, something that Dave had been kind of dreaming about his entire life, and it seemed very stable? Or do we do the crazy thing and just pursue music for a year and see what happens? And like, I didn't want to be the one to make that decision, since it was his dream.
His dream, right.
I didn't want to ask him to give
she
it up.
rubbed my face in the dirt, threw CDs on my head.
Yeah, here's 11 CDs.
No, I mean, we were so used to living off of nothing at that time. You know, it's like we had both. I think JJ lived in a 2-bedroom apartment, and she had 4 other roommates at the time. It was
of course.
So we're getting ready to get married, and it was just like, look, our quality of living is so low. Yeah, like that we could actually try this music thing and not actually make it any lower, you know, to just see if this thing works. And I mean, it was the kind of thing where we would celebrate making $50, like playing out on a corner or something like that. It was like, people are paying us to play music.
Yeah, so we went the music route.
For sure. Okay.
But the irony is, and we didn't even realize this until a few years later, but the quote unquote secure job at the newspaper was like just about to fall apart, like the whole newspaper industry.
Right.
That's when everything started to move online, and newspaper subscriptions were going down. And so he would have lost his job after a year anyway. And so it turned out that like the crazy thing was actually the more stable way to go.
Right. Yeah. You had a year of, hustling with the music thing instead of trying to jump back to that or jumping to something different or a different paper. I mean, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
I have no idea. But what happened was we got married and we started playing music full time, and the original idea was like, let's try this for a year. And a year came and went, and we said, well, could we do this for another year? And it's almost been 18 years. So
wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, just continued to roll along.
That's what JJ, what made you want to start writing songs? Like, it seems that kind of happened later for you. You're in college at that time.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it was probably because it was the first time in my life where everything felt like it was falling apart. Like up until that point, I was kind of good at a lot of things that I tried, like sports, and I got pretty good grades, and did some like theater stuff, and like life had always been pretty easy for me. But then I went away to college, and I actually I played basketball my freshman year of college.
Wow, you must have been good to make the college team.
Well, it was
MVP of her league senior year
in high school.
That's pretty impressive.
But I went to this little college my freshman year, and I thought that if I worked hard enough that I would be like, maybe I could be MVP of my league, like the end of my senior year of college. And as things progressed, like I realized that wasn't going to happen. And I mean, it's just like a whole different level in college. And
sure.
It's a whole different time commitment. And I feel like I digressed in my skill set. And anyway, it was just like a really miserable season for me. And at the end of that year, I decided that I wasn't going to play anymore. And so it was kind of this identity crisis moment where, like, this had been my dream since I was a kid to play basketball in college, and it was just kind of falling apart. And so it was like at that time where I kind of started reaching toward music again, and realized that there was a lot like inside of me that I needed to express. And I was surprised that so much of the time I didn't even know how I was feeling until I would write a song about it. And it would just be kind of this like therapy session for me. And then I would be surprised when I would play it for girls in my dorm and they would say, "Wow, that's actually a pretty good song." And it feels like that's exactly how I feel. Like it feels like you read my journal and then wrote that song. And
Okay.
so they were like really relating to it, which was surprising to me. And so I feel like in that time, music was what helped me process all of these unmet expectations of where I thought I would be in my life and who I thought I was. Um, and so I think that's when it became a really important part of who I am.
And with you, Dave, were you always wanted to be a photographer, but how did music kind of come into your life, and how did you guys mesh the two together?
Yeah, I mean, I it's funny. I feel like I actually have more of a love for the like melodic and production side of music.
Mm-hmm.
Like JJ's like way more of a poet, and for me, like music was a major sort of a way of being able to somehow wrap emotion around something in a way that like couldn't necessarily be expressed in words. And so like the energy of a U2 like anthemic track or something like that, or the like gravity of a Leonard Cohen song or something is it's like um I I always found myself like really attracted to listening to songs that could somehow like captivate that emotional side of me.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't study music. Like I played guitar through junior high and high school. Like we both grew up in the church, and so there were like outlets for us to be able to share music.
Like perform at church or
Yeah,
like,
like
yeah,
youth group or
sure,
college
yeah.
group or
A
whatever.
lot of musicians start out that. I mean, that a lot of people that I talk to, like their first performances were in church.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, and so, I mean, it was like it was sort of an act of service to be
Mm-hmm.
able to help out. And I was always like way more of a side person than someone who was like trying to show off by any means. And so, like, here
The
comes
front
JJ.
man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. So JJ was like beginning to write these songs, and I kind of uh, I'm a little bit more analytical, and so I would like hear what she was bringing, and I kind of brought a little bit more of an editorial ear to the partnership, and would
Mm-hmm.
kind of try to sort of like mold melodies or chord progressions or song structure to be able to help with that. But like it took several years before she let me begin to like start working on lyrics and uh,
It's true.
and like developing more of a sort of partnership when it came to
Mm-hmm.
that. And I mean, I think the amazing thing about having such a long career in music is that we've been able to just see the um, like watch JJ sort of like casting around for like what her identity was. And you know, she was a college student writing for college girls.
Mm-hmm.
But then like as we got married and started to play more, it was like we weren't really cool enough for the up and coming college kids, and we ended up finding like a real audience among people who felt like kind of alienated.
Mm-hmm.
um, and uh, and then sort of miraculously one of JJ's songs was like featured on a national television show, and then that led to some national radio play on Christian radio, which like just opened up this whole new audience for her. um, but that audience wasn't necessarily um, let me think of how to say this. uh, the the Christian radio audience is very broad and listens to Christian radio because it makes them it's an encouragement to them.
Sure.
And a lot of the time they're not even necessarily paying attention to who the artist is. It's just kind of like this is the positive thing that I'm going to end up listening to.
Mm-hmm.
And and JJ's music was like a little bit more introspective and like talked about things that were maybe a little bit more nuanced and not not quite as I'm trying not to use negative language.
Oh, is it like not as like, you know, Christian, like not focused, but I mean, like, is it because the songs weren't like more? I don't know how to say it either.
Well, there's sort of like, yeah, I feel like a lot of Christian music is very like literal.
Right, that's
and
the word.
Even when it goes figurative, it's like very understandably figurative, if that makes sense.
No, it totally does. That was what I was thinking of. It's literal, like, you know that you're listening to a Christian artist.
And
That's right.
Yeah, it's very straightforward.
Straightforward is another good example. But there's bands like Switchfoot where you wouldn't really, you know, you could listen to them and not even know that they're a Christian band. But then when you hear they are, then you could take a different look at their lyrics and the song structure and be like, oh, okay, now I get it.
That's right. Yeah. Well, so what ended up happening is like, because JJ had like this great opportunity to reach this large Christian radio listening audience, it was an exciting time for her, but it was also this sort of like fluky accident. It was like because like the song that landed on the radio wasn't even actually designed to be a radio single. It was a singer-songwriter song about dealing with panic and anxiety, right? It's not like your feel good,
right? Feel good.
And so, like, for several years after that radio experience, I feel like there was this season of trying to do the thing that would get more radio play with these people that we made relationships with. And what we ended up realizing is whatever it was that JJ was creating and we were creating wasn't necessarily what they were looking for. And at that time, we were the parents of young kids, and JJ was feeling a little bit creatively spent. And so we ended up making a lullaby album because like we wanted to just step away from like a genre.
Sure.
And just write some songs that were peaceful, that were kind of like expressing what a mom wanted to express to their children. And it felt like a little nothing project at the time, but over the years, more and more mothers ended up discovering this project, and it sort of launched JJ into even the present sort of phase of her career, which is essentially sharing music for with moms and sort of like providing words and context to this sort of middle-aged woman audience that isn't necessarily super sexy to cater to. There's not even like a genre of like the type of music that JJ is making now. Somehow we kind of find a little bit frustrating because it's like it's too Christian for secular music, but too secular for Christian music, and there's not really a home. And yet at the same time, she's found like a listenership of millions of people every month. And that's a really exciting and interesting place to find ourselves.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
It gets frustrating sometimes because there's not a category for it. So to try to pitch songs for like or hope that we'll get songs on like Spotify editorial playlists. It's like,
Uh-huh.
where, like, what one would it be on?
Right.
But I think what's been encouraging though is to just find that, like, well, and we've always done this, is kind of make our own path. Like, we've never been with the record label. I've just been independent my
Wow.
entire career.
That's pretty impressive. I mean,
Yeah.
to amass that many, I mean, you get millions of streams every month, and not to have some big label like putting money at it or putting money to Spotify or PR or whoever else. I mean, that's really incredible.
Yeah. I mean, it's it's really how, though, I mean, it's the way that we want to operate. It's great because we get to make all of those decisions, but it's rough because we only have ourselves to blame if something goes wrong.
And you got to wear all the hats, I'm sure, too, as far as, yeah, instead of having a team of a bunch of people that are getting everything in together for you.
Yeah.
It's just the two of you, right?
Yeah, but I also think like one of the fortunate things of being this far into a career is that like JJ has developed a faithful enough audience that there doesn't necessarily need to be a big splash when a release happens.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the catalog is just sort of like this slow, steady marching utility for a lot of listeners, where it's like it's the thing that they will end up putting on for like a commute with children, or they'll use it while doing chores in the house or something like that, or it'll be a part of a nap time or bedtime routine. But then it also ends up being used in like really specific contexts, like neonatal intensive care units, like where parents of a premature baby are just stuck in like this kind of sterile environment, and someone will give them one of these records that we've made, and it ends up like providing this sort of like peaceful environment in the midst of like this strange foreign space that parents end up finding themselves.
I love that, because I mean, I can relate directly to that. My youngest son was born 9 weeks premature.
Oh, wow.
And for 21 days, we couldn't, take him home, and he was in this incubator, and he was only 4 pounds. And it was just like this, not weird, but it was scary. And, you have to go in you have this little room that you can see him in. I mean, with technology now, it was nice because he had like this baby cam that you could access like at any time, and you could just like watch him from the cam. And I remember giving it to my mom, and she would like call the nurse line and be like, his blanket fell off. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Mom, they are gonna hate us. Like, but like, I mean, being there, I mean, yeah, you're amongst all these people, and everyone's kind of in this like worrisome, weird limbo of like, what's happening with my kid? I can't even take him home from the hospital.
Right.
But to have something like that, that's really amazing that they're doing that.
Yeah. I think what's been interesting too is realizing that when people talk about my music, it's almost like they put it on when they're looking to feel a certain way. Like, I've heard so many stories recently of like moms will direct message me on Instagram and say like, my child noticed that I was in a bad mood today, or I was frustrated, and my child told me, Mommy, we need to put on JJ Heller.
That's cool.
Like,
that's really
amazing.
cool. That's really cool. I want to back up real quick to the song that kind of, it made it onto a television show. Like, how did that happen? Was that somebody that contacted you and was like, hey, we're going to use this, or?
Okay, this story is incredible and miraculous. We wrote the song with Katie Herzig, who's another singer-songwriter in Nashville. And it really was a song about like, at the time I was dealing with like severe anxiety and having panic attacks multiple times a every day. And so we got together, Dave and I got together with Katie and just talked about like, okay, well, what do you do when you're in a scenario like that? And what does it feel like when you pray every day for something to happen and like you don't hear anything back? And so it was kind of this song like wrestling with those hard things. And so we wrote the song, and then a year later.
Well, here's what happened is that this was right at the time when Radiohead had released their In Rainbows album.
Oh, the one where you can decide how much you wanted to pay for the record. Okay.
Yeah. And so like the idea of giving away music had just happened. Like this is back in 2009,
Yeah.
2008.
Mm-hmm.
And we, you know, were at that time only about 6 years into JJ's career. And we thought like, okay, there's always a gap with CD manufacturing between like when the thing is mastered and when you actually have physical product. And so we thought like, why don't we give away the record, give away a download, and just see what happens in that space of time. And it was downloaded like, I guess maybe 14 or 15,000 times, which was a lot for us at that time.
Oh yeah, that's huge.
And so like one of the people who downloaded it was this music blogger, and she gave the album to her family member, and that person decided to try out for the TV show So You Think You Can Dance. And so it was like this kind of like domino effect of us giving it away and then somebody discovering it and then passing it on to this contestant on the show.
Wow. And then that's how the radio ended up hearing it off the show.
Yep.
So yeah, like it was an amazing segment. It was like the final segment of the show. And fortunately, like Shazam or whatever the like music identifying software, like it fortunately was invented by that time.
Right.
Would like Google the lyrics.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah,
they just type it in too. And yeah, so like one of the people who heard the song was like this guy who managed a huge station in Houston, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And they played the song on the air, and like just kind of on a whim, like one morning, and somebody called in and was like, my husband's addicted to pain medication, and that song was like really like healing for me to be able to hear. And then they played that on the air, and then more people called in about that, and it just kind of like turned into this sort of like
wow.
Yeah, organic thing with this station. And then within like a couple of weeks, like that.
Well, at the end of the week at their meeting, they decided to add the song to their regular like medium rotation.
Sure. Yeah, I worked on radio forever for like 15 years. I understand where you guys are going. Yeah. So they made it like they put it in as like a B playlist or something. So you're hearing it throughout the day.
Right, but like it kept generating this like listener feedback. And so the station, like the program director gets on like a forum online with all of these other program directors and is like, you should check out this artist, JJ Heller. And like by the end of the month, JJ was on the Billboard charts.
That's crazy.
So yeah, I mean, it was a real kind of amazing ride in that like moment in time. And we decided, I mean, it was like we had a newborn at that time, and so we decided to stay independent instead of like JJ didn't want to go like really pedal to the metal and just like sacrifice.
I was gonna ask that. Like at that point where I'm sure record labels and everybody were calling you like, hey, like, it's kind of like when a song hits like a viral moment online now and it has a million streams and it's the first song the person ever wrote or whatever, and then they're all calling them like, hey, like what, what's going on with you?
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, we entertained the idea, but for one, it's like the labels that we met with couldn't really tell us what they could provide. I mean, because we normally, the label would sign the artist and then say, like, we're hoping that we can land a song on the radio for you. But we
Right.
already had that going into it.
Sure.
And so we're like, okay, so you want to sign me? I already have a song on the radio, but now we have to pay you like
A percentage of the record. They're like, how does that work?
I mean, and plus, like Dave was saying, we just had a baby. I knew that if we signed with the label, they'd be like, okay, we're gonna like tour as hard as we can. You're gonna do all these PR things, and like I didn't want to.
I was gonna go there with. Did you, were your shows getting bigger, or were you doing big tours after that moment? But it sounds like, you're in mom mode.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like we did, as a result of like we had that single, we had a subsequent single. We remained independent. We ended up getting physical distribution because people were still buying CDs at that time. We had a booking agent by that time. We ended up buying a tour bus, and we were able to use that as leverage with like other acts. And so we had a very consistent touring career for many years following that.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, so we did spend time on the road, but I mean, like what having a tour bus allowed us to do is like we could bring our kids, and we could
Sure.
like and so we still kind of move forward while being able to maintain like our family unit as best we could.
Yeah, because live shows, like I just sing and Dave plays guitar. So we have never played a show that Dave was not a part of.
Okay.
So, which makes it complicated when you bring kids into the picture, because like mom and dad are on the stage at the same time,
Right.
and we're traveling to all of the gigs together. And so, yeah, I mean, it was like we had to get creative figuring out how to make it work, because there's not a lot of other families we can look to and say like, oh, that's how you do it.
Right. Yeah, most of those artists, I mean, that do that, I mean, Green Day would be an example I can think of, like, but they had already amassed, like, they were playing stadiums at that point, so if they could bring their nanny and the nanny's nanny and everybody else on the bus and have 2 tour buses to fit everybody. But at that, if it's just the 2 of you, that's a totally different, thing you have to overcome there.
Navigate. Yeah. I mean, but we always had, I mean, it was us, and then we would kind of hire out the respective like necessary people that we needed, whether it was a radio promoter or an agreement with a distributor or a booking agent or whatever. But we never had to let go of the rights to our masters or our publishing. And so what that actually allowed us to do over time, I mean, it was a goal for me even before any of this radio stuff happened, to eventually like pay off a mortgage. It's like Dave Ramsey's here in Tennessee.
Oh yeah, I know.
Like, paying off your mortgage guy.
I saw his big old building last time I was there when we drove by down to the house. I was like, that's pretty cool. Yeah. He's from Franklin, isn't he? Yeah.
Well, so I mean, like we had this like amazing kind of commercial moment, and so what we ended up doing is we just like eradicated debt. And what that allowed us to do is have like a very low bottom line, so that if touring dried up, if record sales became less and less, we could just pour money into making new albums if we wanted to, and like have this music making thing actually be a sustainable thing. Because I think what happens with a lot, especially of young artists, is like you have to like burn the candle at both ends. But pretty soon you run out of candle.
Right. No, yeah, totally. I mean, you guys did it smart. Well, now you have, if like you said, if stuff goes down, it's okay, because you have like a nest egg of that what you've already kind of paid for or did whatever. Whereas a lot of these people are buying these houses and cars and all this stuff they can't afford. And it's like, oh, well, that's going to end tragic unless this
No.
continues to go up the hill.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's part of what has been helpful for us in not having a label. I mean, I don't know, because I can't compare it because we've never been with the label, but I think it was easier for us to stay level-headed about what was going on because we could just talk to each other and there was nobody saying like, you're going to rise to the top, we're going to keep going this way, it's only up from here. And and so we just kind of knew that like it was not always going to be that way. Like we were not always going to have a song on the radio and be on the Billboard charts. And so we just decided like, let's be very conservative with our money and pay off everything that we can so that we can just keep making music because that's what we love.
But I mean, it's like the last 3 albums that we've made have been orchestrally like produced. Like we work for months on arrangements, and like the budgets for these albums are like 60, 80, $100,000. And like we can do that because like there's not that like major pressure externally. It's like the listenership is there, and there's just margin for us to be able to just make beautiful things without wondering, is this going to be a hit? Like, is some gatekeeper going to say that this is good enough? And it's like, no, we're reaching an audience, and that audience wants to hear whatever JJ is making next. And one of the things that we haven't talked about actually is that in 2017,
that was where I was going next.
Yeah,
I love this.
We found ourselves with a garage full of CDs, and
like literally thousands and embarrassing amounts of
CDs. And to see nobody buys CDs anymore, but we still wanted to keep making music. And we kind of stumbled into this way of just deciding like we're going to release a single every month. And it's something that we've just kept up with since spring of 2017. And it's been a really amazing way to like consistently stay in front of people while not necessarily getting really uptight about like the launch. Like the launch is always just like with a giant organization, you need to like point every single department in the same direction, right? So that there's all of this momentum. And instead, because we're a tiny operation, it's like, hey, we made something this month, and if you don't like it, we're going to make something next month.
Yeah, I think that's amazing, because I was thinking about artists right now where they might have released or recorded a record at the end of 2019, and they're like, okay, it's coming out in March 13th or whatever it is, and then COVID hits, and it's okay, well, now we're going to push it back because shows are going to happen in October, and now we're at following a year after that October when shows are supposed to happen, and they're still sitting on this record that has been recorded like 2 years ago now.
Right.
So with your guys' plan, I mean, we're going to put a song out the first Friday of every month, no matter what. It's going to happen. And there's not this big old, like, everybody trying to figure out the best plan of when the album should come out because you got to tour the album. And it's you guys have created this amazing thing, and you've been doing it for 4 years now almost.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, and we had no idea if it was going to work, especially like looking at the numbers and even owning all of our own masters. It's still like we get paid 1/3 of a cent per stream from Spotify.
Right.
So it's like, that's a lot of streams that need to accumulate for us to actually make a living. And so when we made the pivot to like pour our energy into streaming, which we resisted for a really long time, because it was like, no, people have to pay for our music. It's worth
Mhm.
paying for. And there was just kind of like this mental block. But soon we realized like we either have to pivot or die. Um, so we decided like we're just going to go all in with this streaming thing, but we don't know how it's going to go. And so we did Patreon for like
Probably a year and a half or something.
yeah. And just to kind of underwrite the cost of making the singles.
Mhm.
And that was really helpful. And then, you know, about a year and a half into it, we looked at the numbers and realized like, okay, the experiment was a success. Like we don't need to do Patreon anymore. And so we said, thanks everybody. It's been great.
Oh,
We
so you
really
guys
appreciate it.
stopped doing it.
Yeah.
Stop doing Patreon?
Mhm.
That's interesting because bands are like just now trying to do that. I mean, like last year they're like, okay, what do we do? Okay, we're gonna do Patreon. Like I feel like you
Yeah.
guys have been ahead of the curve for years, you know?
I don't know anything.
Well, I think like so much of it, I was listening to an interview with Jack Conte about Patreon where he was just saying like the purpose of that platform was to help sustain people like Pomplamoose, the band that he was a part of,
Mhm.
that was like they were getting millions of YouTube streams on a monthly basis, or views. But he knew that like 1 million views on YouTube would only generate like $100 worth of revenue. It was like that small. And he was like, there has to be a way to like
Monetize.
to get this
Yeah.
audience to end up supporting. And so it's like it is this like interesting sort of equation where it's like you need good content, you need an audience, and then you need a platform to like end up helping that audience support the good content.
Sure.
But like Conti is not saying like come to Patreon and you will be successful, or
Mhm.
like we will support your living. It's like, no, this is for people who already like have developed that audience.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
and like, and what we ended up realizing is like actually the model is like the music industry model as it is actually working for us because our team is so small. And our like, and because we've like eradicated debt and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
It's like we're kind of a unicorn in that way. But one of the other things that I did want to say is like we have our own podcast where like we interview other musicians and stuff, and one of the guys that we were talking to was giving this analogy of like being a pro sports like athlete.
Mhm.
And that like if you're in the NFL, you have like a pretty short shelf life. It's like you have 8 years, like maybe
Yeah.
a good career is 12 years long or something.
Unless you're Tom
And
Brady.
yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah.
There you go.
Oh my God.
That's exceptional. Well, but like as we were talking to him, JJ was like,
Well, and he was saying that is the equivalent to like a pop artist. Like you only have, you know,
so
8
much
years
time.
or something.
Yeah.
And then you kind of age out of
Sure. No, yeah, that makes sense.
But what JJ was saying is like, you know, I think we just chose a different sport than football. Like we're the equivalent of like bocce ball. It's like you can play bocce ball until you're like 80.
Or golf. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, the golfers are out there in their 60s still making a ton of money.
I mean, so like you think about it, like we have these singles where we get to kind of be a little bit more experimental. And then we also have like these lullaby albums. And it's like kids are going to be going to sleep for a really long time.
Forever.
And so like, yeah, if our music is serving a purpose like that, and like we like to think of it as sort of like, this is not when you think of lullaby music, it's like chimes and like twinkle twinkle little star, and like no, we're trying to like make it sophisticated. We want it to sound like an orchestral like soundtrack to a film or something like that. And like sometimes it's original music, sometimes it's like covers like Bridge Over Troubled Water or Edelweiss, or like familiar like nostalgic songs. But it's like if you're able to like provide that to a listenership who wants to hear it, they'll keep listening, you know, for a really long time. Not
Yeah.
because you're cool, but because you're providing like a feeling to them or your
Mm-hmm.
comfort to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense with, like you said. I mean, you're providing something that people are always going to gravitate to. It's not like you have this one single and it's like, oh, everybody loves this song this year. And then are you going to be able to put out another song that good? And if you do, it's like, what's going to follow that? And like you see these stars kind of go up and then they're gone. And you're like, what
Right.
happened to so and so? They had that huge song 5 years ago. And now they're, you know,
Yeah.
doing try to do Patreon or something.
Right.
But yeah, it's wild. Well, with that, like, how has COVID affected you guys aside from, all the death and everything else that's horrible about it? But I mean, as musicians, you have had this thing happening for 3 years, 4 years now, where you already know, okay, I'm going to put out a song on this first of this month. And I don't know how often you guys are out playing and touring, but how did that, if at all, affect you guys as far as artists?
Well, it's really interesting because going into 2020, we had already decided that we were going to pull way back from touring, like play like 5 shows or less.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
just because our two girls, they're 12 and 9 right now,
Okay.
and like for their entire lives, they've either like come with us on tour or they've been used to like, okay, mom and dad are leaving, like you're gonna stay here with the nanny, and they're like, cool, see ya, mom and dad. um but then a few years ago, they just started to get really sad every time we would leave, and they would ask us not to go, and they had
That
never.
has to be hard. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like my mom heart was like ripped out. And so we just kind of started talking about like, well, what would it be like if we toured less? And so we started gradually tapering off of the road. And then I realized like I don't even really enjoy playing shows right now. Um and so like heading into 2020, it's like, well, yeah, let's maybe play 5 shows. So it really for us was not much of a pivot. Like we were
Hmm.
already prepared to not go out on the road.
I mean, what did happen when COVID hit is that we were used to going into the studio to work with our other
Oh,
like
okay. I was
and
gonna ask, so
collaborators.
so you don't record at home. You actually go to a studio to record
Yeah,
all the songs. Okay.
right. Yeah, and I mean, it's like uh, somebody might like the mix engineer might be in another part of town, and we might not be in the room with him. Um, but like normally when we're working with a producer, we're in the same space. And so what 2020 forced us to do was like we bought some gear. I mean, we started a podcast that had already been in the works. Um, and so we kind of like the podcast gear, also turned out to be like vocal tracking gear.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I kind of had a crash course in audio engineering in
That's
2020.
that's awesome. Yeah.
But what it actually allowed us to do was to write. I mean, Zoom, like everybody was just like sitting on their thumbs, basically wondering like, what are we gonna do?
Hmm.
And so we co-wrote a bunch, and we produced a podcast, and we released. I think in the spring we probably released like 4 singles in March and April instead of like the 2 that would have come out. We've been working
Oh,
on,
okay. You put out a little bit more music than the one a month.
yeah, that's right. And then like we actually we had other like lullaby stuff that was in the works in addition to that. And so like that's been unrolling this year. Um so or in 2020. So it
Hmm.
was like actually a very prolific year just because we were already used to being in sort of a posture of creativity.
Hmm.
Um, and so we just kind of like pressed into it a little bit more.
That's amazing. Yeah. Well, with the recording and stuff, was that were you able to still go in, or when you went to the studio, you're like, okay, I have 5 song ideas. We got to bang them all out because I don't know the next time I'm going to be here, and we want to keep putting out a song every week or the first of every month, and who knows if we can get back in here. Was that a
Right.
concern?
Well, so the producer who we had been working with leading up to the pandemic for our singles is this guy Cody Fry, who's also an artist, and he's like insanely talented. And we had already made several songs with him in his studio. So when like the lockdown happened, um, he didn't feel comfortable with us coming to the studio, and so we just started to work remotely.
Okay.
And like we use this this app. Is it an app?
Yeah,
Like Audio Movers, where it's like it live streams what's coming out of the console as the producer's like working on this track.
Oh, wow.
So
Because
we can hear it in real time. And
instead
so
of
we
the
have like,
latency issues that
yeah,
were happening. Okay.
well, I mean, it's like there might be a little bit of latency, but essentially it's like we get to hear what's going down. We have like a separate like
speakerphone.
yeah, like Skype session or
Yeah.
FaceTime session where like we just get to sort of like unmute the call and just be like, hey, can you try that again? But like hit the 6 chord instead of the 4 or whatever.
Oh, sure.
And so it's like we're still doing the same thing that we would be doing if we were sitting on a couch in the room. And instead we're just kind of like making informed decisions. Like it's not as ideal, but it's definitely workable.
And then I've tracked maybe 16 vocals in my closet now.
Oh, wow.
Like my hanging clothes here and the microphone here. I like use a safety pin and like pin the lyrics to my shirt.
That's amazing. Wow. So
But,
I'm sure you have a bunch of songs in the can for the next few months.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, like, because we sort of settled in on this, like, okay, we're going to be releasing every month. As we started to find a rhythm, we just built more and more margin into our schedule. So we're working on music for next year.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So instead of albums, is this going to be the plan from here on out? It's just a song a month, or is there a thought to do another record, or what are you guys thinking?
Well, the records that we're making now are in that like lullaby category.
Okay.
Like they're called I Dream of You. And so we just released one of those records.
Volume 3.
Yeah, volume 3 on February 5th.
Oh, wow. So recently, about a
yeah.
couple weeks ago.
Yeah. And they're all like iconic love songs. So that was a really fun project.
Yeah, let me figure out how to answer your question. Like essentially, like what we've also learned about like especially the Spotify algorithm is that like you can release an entire record on one Friday. And you only get to choose to highlight one of those songs on that release.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I see what you're saying.
And so like that will feed into people's like Spotify has their algorithmic playlists. And so like you choose one song from that record and it'll go into all of your listeners' release radar, like that kind of thing. But you could also instead string that release along for whatever, however many weeks or months you want to, and just keep hitting that audience on a consistent basis.
But it can't be more than once a week, right? It has to be like, yeah.
You need at least a week of buffer time. But
okay.
But what's crazy is like looking at the analytics, like on our release day, the song that we chose as like the single off of that record had like 10 times the amount of streams as all the other songs.
Oh, wow.
So that shows you like how powerful that algorithm is.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're really trying to take advantage of that.
So yeah, there is this sort of like passive listens versus sort of user driven like album listen.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
You kind of have to like use both in different contexts, but it's like it's way more advantageous to an artist, especially an independent artist,
Mm-hmm.
to just, if you've got a 10-song record, release it over 10 months instead of like working on it for so long and just dropping it, because it will just kind of like disappear into the digital ether.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I'll even interview artists where I'll look at their Spotify and, you know, they'll have, say, you know, a few 100,000 songs on a handful of them on their like top play, or, you know, 5 songs that they choose. And then one of them will be like 8 million. And it's like, oh, that one probably got playlisted. And it's amazing the reach and the amount of plays songs get if you land within that algorithm.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, we haven't, I mean, kind of like what JJ was saying earlier, it's like, because she doesn't fit very squarely in, like, she's not necessarily like getting playlisted by like Christian playlists, but she's not really by like pop playlists or singer-songwriter. And so it's like, it's nice if it ever lands, but doesn't happen very frequently. And so instead, it's just a matter of like, how can we communicate to listeners like, hey, expect something new very consistently, and you will end up finding it.
That's really cool. And thank you guys so much for taking time to chat with me today. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah. I have one more question for you both. I want to know if you have any advice for aspiring artists.
There's so many lessons we have learned. I think I would say to be patient with the process. I ran across this quote a couple years ago that resonated so much with me. It's a quote by Miles Davis. And he said something like, "Man, it takes a long time to sound like yourself."
I love that. That's a good quote.
I know. And like, you know, I've been singing full time for like almost 18 years now. And I feel like I've just now kind of settled into who I am as an artist. And it's great. It's taken a really long time to figure out that like I am the one who just sings really quietly and understated, and that's okay. And so I think, you know, a lot of people feel the pressure that they have to figure it out. Like right now, they have to figure out what's cool at this exact moment. And I think that, you know, for most people, it takes a long time, and that's okay.
I love that.
I had 2 things to say. I'm trying to remember.
I distracted you with all of my wisdom.
Yes, you did.
My profound insights.
That Miles Davis quote is so good. Okay. Okay, I remembered one of them. The first one is early in JJ's career, I felt like it was really important for me to kind of have my thumbprint on everything. It was like every creative decision, whether it was a lyric or a melody or going into the studio and making some production decision or whatever, I was just like, I must have annoyed the crap out of our producers. Like, you know, like just the young kind of like ambitious guy who just like feels like he knows everything. And I just feel like the thing that I wish that younger version of myself knew is that collaboration is your best friend. Like there are so many people who are more talented than you are. Like you might have great vocal pipes, or you might like know how to like play some killer guitar solo or whatever. And somebody can deliver that lyric better than you, and somebody has better tone on their guitar than you do, or whatever. And it's like, if you actually can embrace that rather than being threatened by it, it will make your work so much better.
Mhm.
And I feel like that is what has elevated JJ's music, especially in the last couple of years, is just that like we've let our collaborators be the best they can be. And it's just like the music has just gotten so much better. So that's one thing. The other thing that I was going to say,
Oh,
let's
you
see.
remembered. No, you didn't remember.
It came to me and then I lost it, but I'll remember it again. Okay, this is the other thing, and it kind of goes hand in hand with that, is that I think, especially early on, what the question that we were asking ourselves was, how can we impress you, audience member? And we spent a really long time trying to be impressive to either the audience or the gatekeepers or some anonymous person that we like didn't even know but thought might want to like our music. And what we ended up realizing is like this thing that we're making is actually for somebody. And if we can picture who that person is and see the thing that we're making as a gift for them rather than a gift to ourselves, like you are going to think I'm so amazing when you hear this, like that shift in your headspace is going to make your music so much better. If you're just able to go like, hey, lonely person, here's a song that I wrote to make you feel less alone. Or hey, person who wants to get down on the dance floor, I made you a beat that you are just going to love. Or whatever the thing is. It's like musicians are in the service industry. So like serve people. Bringing it backward.